So, like, in accordance with this, we will not be able to achieve any growth or make any progress in our current situation. Due to this particular reason, the lending model underwent a change, so to speak, in the following manner as outlined below. I'm going to tell you a little story now. I think many of you have already heard it, which I made up myself, which illustrates this situation. Due to the fact that I wrote it with the aim of targeting the youth demographic, there is also a moralistic line that underscores the true and deep significance of family life. So, this guy returns to his residence in the evening after work, and on the doorstep of either his flat or grand house, his spouse greets him and says, "Darling, we have encountered a catastrophe." "Something happened to the kids?" our hero asks. He says, No, everything is fine with the kids, but there are different options ahead. So, because someone crashed into my Ferrari with a Lada, our washing machine broke down, of course. She says, husband tries to remove coat. We'll figure it out. And wife tells him, No, honey, you didn't understand. I have a meeting with my girlfriends there tomorrow. Everything should be fine for me. So please go and solve the problem. And until you solve it, don't come home, you know. And so our hero is a bit stunned and comes out either from the entrance or, onto the street. And he's thinking, like, what should he actually do, He doesn't have any money in his pocket. Where did it suddenly go? Well, let's say for simplicity's sake, it's a washing machine, right? We must act. Out of nowhere, he sees a sign above the neighboring house that says bank. He goes to the bank and a clerk says, "How can we help you?" He tells him, "Well, I need a washing machine." And then the clerk says a phrase that you will never hear in a normal bank. He's like, "Well, we can definitely help you, but there's one question. Tell me, how much money can you give us without burdening your family budget?" Well, our hero says, ballpark figures around 1,000 rubles per year. Great, the clerk says. So our bank's policy for shareholders is that for every ruble we lend, we should get back 20 rubles. 20% on top. So we're offering you a deal here. We'll give you a loan of 5,000 rubles, and you can use it to buy yourself a washing machine right now at the store next door. But you'll have to pay us back in 6 installments. Thousands of rubles in a year will be interest, and another 1,000 rubles over the course of 5 years. Okay, hero says, signs contract. A year later, receives loan interest in bank, 1,000 rubles added to account. They inform him, there's economic boom, great happiness, everything is wonderful. That's why shareholders lowered demands, our turnover growing, so only need to repay 10% instead of 20. So we're ready to give you a loan of 10,000 rubles, and you'll pay us back 1,000 after a year. That'll be the interest. And you'll keep paying 1,000 for another 10 years. You immediately pay off 5,000, the previous loan, and then buy your wife a dishwasher with the remaining 5,000. He happily takes out a loan. 1 year later, 1,000 rubles are received as interest on a 10,000 ruble loan. They inform him that he is an excellent customer with an impressive credit history and offer him a 20,000 ruble credit at a favorable interest rate of 5%. Put out 10,000 from the previous one, 1,000 rubles in interest for the next year, and so on with 1,000 rubles. He says, great, takes out a loan. Another year goes by, he returns with 1,000 rubles. They inform him, you are the winner of the in-house bank lottery. Just for you, 2.5%. Here's a loan of 40,000 for you. Now pay attention. He makes payments of a predetermined sum, which is not overly onerous for him. His wealth keeps on growing all the time. There are just 2 problems that need to be addressed. First, debts are always growing. And the second thing is that all of this is happening against the backdrop of falling credit costs. And now, at this very moment, here is the key picture that perfectly illustrates and effectively shows the result of ergonomics principles in action. In 1980, Paul Volcker, who was fighting inflation, pushed up the interest rate of the US Federal Reserve at a level of 19%. Since then, the rate in general has been consistently decreasing. The sole exception is the period from 1994 to 2000, when, due to the expansion of markets into the territory of the former USSR, individuals were able to recall the true meaning of happiness. The red graph represents a 30-year mortgage, that is the actual rate, not the central bank's or RS rate for banks, but a real rate. And here the graph is not fully completed. At the end of 2008, in December, The interest rate of the US Federal Reserve became zero. The approach of reducing risks for producers by stimulating and motivating the consumer has come to an end, marking the conclusion of this mechanism. And we're back in the 70s crisis. But that's the crisis of 1907 to 1908. So these are the crises of the decline in capital efficiency of the years 1907 to 1908, the 1930s, and the 1970s. Now he is repeating himself. The nearest comparable to the spring of 1930 is September 2008, which is the closest equivalent in terms of economic impact. The deflationary shock has commenced. Nevertheless, Bernanke, the present leader of the Federal Reserve System of the United States, who is a specialist on the Great Depression, has already recognized that you cannot simply have a deflationary shock. It would be a catastrophe. The rate of decline would be 1% of GDP per month, similar to the situation in the past. So he initiated the process of injecting money into the economy. Just a reminder, the dollar has been the global currency ever since the Bretton Woods agreements. Following the disintegration of the USSR, a comprehensive labor division system was established. The global economy heavily relies on the US dollar as its foundation. And throughout this period, we ended up with such an incredibly beautiful picture. The average debt of an American household, as a result of the fact that everyone is being credited, has witnessed a significant increase from around 60-65% of annual income to a level that surpasses 130% of annual income. Currently, it has decreased a bit to 120. Nonetheless, it is not possible to repay such a debt in any way. The economy doesn't generate enough financial flows to repay such a debt. The savings rate has dropped, well, that's official inflation, down to zero. In reality, it was minus 5%. I won't get into the nitty-gritty right now, but this graph shows that the demand of American households today, compared to their incomes, is greater than those incomes by $3 trillion a year. This is the scale of the decline that awaits us. So like the thing is, when the demand goes down, both the income and the result go down. And as a result, we end up in this equilibrium point that's like lower than what we have now, like around $7 trillion lower. Considering the real GDP of the United States, around 13 trillion, this is a drop in the US GDP of somewhere around 55 to 60%. This looks absolutely mind-boggling, and how on earth can this be? It's just impossible. But here's the catch. The matter at hand is that in a system where profit for the past 30 or so years is not generated through production, but rather through credit, because for the first time in history, both producers and consumers started taking loans, leading to banks lending on both ends. You ultimately end up with a financial economy that is driven by this credit-based approach to generating profit and sustaining economic activity. The share of the financial sector in profit redistribution has exceeded 50%, and the share of the financial sector in GDP has exceeded 50%. Consequently, this downturn of more than 2 times that is looming over the American economy is a downturn that is directly linked to the fact that the share of the financial sector is set to decrease substantially, plummeting from 50% to a mere 10%. And the economy will fall by half. So the share of the financial sector in absolute numbers will decrease by 10 times. Now let's take a look at what this signifies from the perspective of the elite. What precisely defines a modern wealthy person in today's society? This is an individual who possesses capital assets, so to speak, amounting to a total of $8 billion. That is a substantial amount. However, it is not feasible to spread capitalization on bread. In order to take action and engage in activities such as making deals, mergers, acquisitions, and investing in their own property, he is in need of financial resources. What's he up to? He takes out loans for this capitalization. If he possesses 5 credits out of that total of 8 billion, then he is in a truly advantageous situation. If it's for 7 billion, it's a tolerable situation. If he has 8 billion in assets and 9 billion in debts, that's already a problem. At the same time, these assets there provide him with some yearly income, so to speak, a total of 200 million, which in reality is utilized to pay off the interest on the loans. All is great. All is in chocolate. In the summer of 2008, I interviewed with the Komsomolskaya Pravda newspaper, stating that in 3 years our oligarchs will go bankrupt. They actually split in the fall of 2008, about 6 months later, employing a simple scheme. The asset capitalization has dropped, and where it used to be 8 billion, it's now 4 or even 3. And here you have a picture. Asset capitalization is 3 billion or maybe 4, and debts are around 5 or 7. And the income spike is up to 50 million. In 50 million, you can't close the gap even in 1 billion, let alone in 2, 3 billion. And that is the ultimate fate that befalls the majority of those individuals who are currently regarded as wealthy in today's society, a fate that awaits most of them despite their current affluence and status. As mentioned before, 90% of individuals will go broke following this method. This is a disaster from the viewpoint of the modern elites. They are making a desperate effort to resist. Now, let us observe what they have commenced and are presently engaged in performing. We are witnessing a repetition of the crises that occurred in the 1970s and the 1930s. There's no room to expand anymore. World war is not the way to go. The First World War and the Second World War were basically wars between technological zones fighting for markets. Today, it's like a tech zone where the dollar controls all the markets. Everything that is produced in the world is produced either to sell in the United States of America for dollars, or to sell to those who have dollars from selling something in the USA, or to those who have dollars from selling something to someone who sold something in the USA. Prior to the crisis, the United States accounted for 40% of the overall global demand in the international market. And there's absolutely no way to expand. The mechanism of stimulation has reached its limits and is completely exhausted. The debts are critical, 120 to 130% of annual income. It's impossible to service this debt anymore, even with a real interest rate of 3-4% like it is now. It doesn't get any lower than this percent, like right now. What's the move?
That's it. What's next?
So, like, in this specific situation, the natural thought that comes up is to replicate the trick that was performed in the early 20th century during the time period of the 1900s. Because today is basically a complete repetition of the same picture that was at the beginning of the 20th century. In the past, there existed independent banks, and the central bank constructed a superstructure on top of them. Today an idea arose, and today the global economy, central banks, and an idea emerged to create a superstructure over them, a central bank that would assume some risks. It is not the 7th or 8th year anymore. There is no more JP Morgan. Now there are bureaucrats who have started openly discussing it. This was discussed in the documents J8, J20 at different congresses, at different assemblies. The decision has already been made that it will be based on the IMF. The decision has already been made that these will be new currencies, special drawing rights, which the IMF will use to lend to central banks. And they'll be within the limits of this lending to their banks. And whoever didn't make it, well, they're going to die. Everything would be fantastic. However, to their surprise, the Americans discovered that the implementation of this idea poses a significant obstacle to their ability to counterfeit their dollars. And then there was this astroscope thing. It was a complete accident, totally unintentional. I'm curious, which president are you referring to? Can you provide more context or details? No, this is not the president's business. It is the business of the IMF and the business of those global bankers. And they brought down the world bankers. So first they got rid of Strauss-Kahn, and the next day it's all about the central banks. The central bank has vanished from all documents. Well, you know, I laughed so much I nearly urinated in my pants. Extremely funny. And then the representatives of the bankers were expelled from the administration of the President of the United States of America for the very first time. New Obama admin, no global bankers. Why did this happen? What's the reason behind it? Because after the Strauss-Kahn case, it became clear that this global financial elite should be looking for ways to save themselves. And what are the salvation mechanisms? Since the previous surge in the deepening of division of labor was carried out under artificial demand stimulation, which is approaching its conclusion and demand will decrease, it implies that the level of division of labor will reduce, similar to what happened in Russia in the 1990s. During the 1990s, there were instances where we would lose around 100 to 200 unique technologies on an annual basis. We used to make them, but now we can't due to lack of people, equipment, factories, nothing. It's empty. The technology disappeared. So here's the thing, and this is going to be on a global scale for a simple reason, because there is not enough demand. He is going to bite the dust. He is already descending, despite their desperate attempts to revive him through stimulation. So in this situation, you have to look for other sources. And the global financial elite has split into three groups. The first group, which is placing a bet to gain control over the printing press of the Federal Reserve System, but solely in the interest of the United States of America. So in other words, it will be a separate center, not a unified system of division of labor, but rather a more limited and narrower system of division of labor, which will be based on the available resources in the form of dollar emissions. There is another group that wants to maintain these international financial institutions at any and all expenses. And she is making an effort to extract valuable resources from the mechanisms that they still have at their disposal. And it is this group that has determined that because it no longer possesses any assets, and these are mainly financial institutions, it must make a decision to write off its outstanding debts. And it is exactly this group led by the International Monetary Fund that caused the situation in Cyprus. Using basic logic, at the moment we are practicing on kittens, Cyprus style, and afterwards we will write off all the debts in each and every country. And to all of the depositors, I will tell you guys, that is it. I forgive everyone I owe. Crisis. And they violated the sacred right of private property in that place, and they declared to all individuals that a bank deposit is no longer considered an asset, and they declared that money cannot be kept in banks for extended periods of time, and so on. And so on, but they have no way out. The third group came up with a really awesome solution. She concluded that if maintaining a unified system of division of labor becomes unprofitable because of a decrease in the level of division of labor, then it is logical to create multiple currency zones in the world and assume the role of an intermediary between them, the role of a global middleman. Based in London, which conspiracy theorists call the Rothschilds, and who, so to speak, play an important role in which the descendants, respectively, my Earl, Nathan Rothschild, which I showed you, they moved their operational base from London to Hong Kong and, accordingly, put gold back in the position of a single measure of value. This group is interested in the development of the customs union and in Russia becoming a center of power again. It is this group that is interested in the development of the customs union and in Russia once more becoming a center of power. There will be about 5-6 currency zones in the world, as it is currently shaping up. This is the dollar zone, this is the euro zone. And in the European Union, we clearly see a shift in the center of gravity from Brussels to Berlin. This is the zone of Latin America and Southern Africa. This is the territory that belongs to Yuan. This is India, resembling its own zone and its own market in terms of exclusivity and distinctiveness. And finally, it's the Eurasian space, where two key players, Russia and Turkey. Regrettably, all the economic policy in our nation is determined by individuals appointed by the IMF, that is, international bankers. Just as it was in the good old USA in the late 19th and early 20th centuries of the past. These individuals control both the government, the central bank, and the administration of the president. They are attempting to hinder all efforts at integration. We managed to create a customs union, but as a revenge, Glazev was fired, who was actually the main initiator of this scheme. And Putin appointed Glaziev as an advisor. There was even a consideration that he could assume the position of the chairman of the central bank. Once again, the bankers were left in the dust. And the main theorists, in the United States of America, the main theorists were big bankers, while in our country, pay attention, the main theorists are the organizers of the '98 default. So it is Kudrin, it is Dubinin, it is Alexashenko. Well, in actuality, it is Ignatiev, who also in actuality happened to be Chubai separately, individually, and respectively. Chubai never pretended to be a theorist, although he definitely talked a lot of nonsense about his eyes, constantly exaggerating their importance and making unfounded claims. So today we find ourselves in a situation where the dollar, which became the currency of the Western countries in 1944 and in 1971, was detached from the gold standard and thus became an independent unit of value, and in 1991 became a global currency, is gradually returning to the role of a regional currency, losing its status as the dominant global currency it once held. I believe he will be living in this role for the next 2 decades, 3 decades, or even half a century. Unless, of course, something unforeseen happens, like a civil war breaking out in the United States of America that ultimately leads to the disintegration and complete fragmentation of this country as we know it. This particular scenario has the right to be discussed, but the chances of it happening or coming to pass are extremely slim. So I believe we are not going to discuss this. So essentially, that is the entirety of what I wanted to convey. There is nothing more to add. So I narrated a rough story about the dollar and the financial system. Thanks for your attention.
Thanks.
What are the questions going to be? Thank you. Allow me to ask my question while also involving our audience as an expert at the same time. On one of the economic forums, they were talking about whether there is a replacement for the existing, whether there is an alternative to the existing global currency system. And in connection with this, let us proceed to bring up the question that we have. Global reserve currencies. And we provided the opportunity for multiple options, specifically 5 different answers. And starting from the moment the countdown begins, you will have the chance to vote for your preferred answer and make your voice heard. So the global reserve currency of the future is still the dollar, maybe the euro or the yuan or the yen or the ruble. And at the end of the voting, Mikhail Leonidovich, we will give you a personal word to vote separately. You are welcome. Okay, we can start the voting process now. Well, here are our results. Only 24 out of 52 people voted. That's not our entire audience, there are more of us, and apparently there are those who didn't choose any of these options. Perhaps we will require a distinct vote, but it is not necessary to observe these blocks being approved. Now give us your take on these results. Got an opinion?
2 years ago at the Astana Economic Forum, which by the way will be happening again in May, Kazakhstan, like any young democracy, is very sensitive about its reputation. So they invite Nobel laureates to their forum, not just 1 or 2 people, like somewhere in Sochi or, God forgive, in St. Petersburg, but accordingly, last year there were 8 of them, and this year, they say, there will be 14. 2 years ago, there was this amazing story. It was already there. In Kazakhstan, you can't discuss it in Moscow, where the liberals took over everything, not in London, not in Washington, not in New York, but in Astana you can. In Astana, discussing currency zones 2 years ago. Reminder, introduced term currency zones in book in 2003. The sunset of the dollar empire and the end of the American tax. So there was this representative from Japan at this session about currency zones, and he was talking about that thing. We have an understanding that we will not achieve any significant progress with the yen, so our preference is either the Eurozone or the zone of the dollar. So then this rep from China stands up and says, there's this opinion that you'll be in the yuan zone. Nah, says the Japanese guy, we want to be in the euro zone or the dollar zone. We haven't chosen yet. So the same representative from China stood up again and said, you can make up your mind however you want, but we know for sure that you'll be in the yuan zone. Now, this is what you call life. In actuality, I believe the picture will be similar to something like this. There will be approximately 6 more or less equal zones. So there will be a dollar zone, a euro zone, a conditional sukriya zone. That's a term from Chavez, yuan, Indian rupee, and possibly some complex combination of the ruble and the Turkish lira. And between them, inside the zones, there will be a situation similar to the current one. There will be floating exchange rates, there will be some smaller currencies and so forth. However, the turnover between the zones will be linked to gold. And in that sense, I believe that gold will certainly be the worldwide reserve currency. And there will be approximately 5 equal currencies, 6 equal currencies. If, of course, we manage to overcome the tyranny of liberals and still make this project of a currency zone ours, Eurasian.
Thanks. And here's the thing. I would like to ensure that your question does not agree with either the answer, let's say the lecturer, or with any of those answers provided.
But the biggest zone in terms of, I think both development and economic scale will definitely be the yuan zone.
From our table, it is evident that the dollar is not placed on a pedestal of honor, but rather holds a respectable position in second place. Hey guys, someone wanted to say something else that we didn't take into account in our question. Maybe this will be your question. Why don't they think so, dear lecturer? Mikhail Leonidovich, please.
I don't know why, but most likely I won't say. But for some reason, it seems to me that everything always comes down to paired confrontations. Not 5, not 6, but the main 2. No can do, and not north-south, roughly speaking.
No can do, for a simple reason. The thing is, you see, the level of division of labor, the average wage in the United States of America before the downturn was at around 60, household income at the level of 62, 63 years. They'll fall in the 30s. So this means that from the perspective of the division of labor, it'll be profitable to have 5, 6 currency zones.
But will they all be competing with each other?
They will definitely be competing with one another. They will, approximately speaking, be the individuals who will be in the new territories. Yes, it is the Eurasian zone, the Indian zone, and the Latin American zone. They will be involved in import substitution. In accordance with this, the yuan zone will be involved in restructuring its economy from an export-oriented approach to an internal approach, focusing on the domestic market, while Europe and the USA will experience a decline and, accordingly, attempt to maintain a somewhat respectable level. That is the way it is. So actually, I think the picture will be like this. Not for a duration of 3 years, but for a span of 10 years. That is the result of 10 years. China is expected to stay at the current level of GDP development, and there is a possibility of a slight decline. Europe and the USA will face a major blow, but currently they're at the pinnacle of the world. Accordingly, Latin America and Russia, that's the Eurasian zone, will be catching up. But these are like versions. It's not being implemented yet. This here is the potential that we've got. BTW, I'd like to draw your attention to the story with the discussion about the appointment of the central bank chairman. This is actually a discussion about the pace of economic growth. Liberals, all individuals, including Ignatiev, Shuvalova, and Nabulina, are expressing the consensus to continue with the unchanged political approach. She will provide us with a 3% growth. Today we're already calming down. So Nabulina's appointment is Putin's way of saying that he's okay with the economic downturn. In my opinion, I think that is not right. His decline is not satisfactory. He was just broadcasting that nonsense they fed him without questioning its validity. Liberals, because at present we already have an economic downturn in the country. He has been going for 4 months already, without a doubt. Perhaps it began in November, but December, January, February, March, we are certainly experiencing financial loss. As long as this minus is below 3%, that is less than 3%, you can turn it into a plus using statistical methods. I think he will drop below a 3% decline month to month, similar to where May month, if in May compared to May 12th, he will have to fix this decline because there will be too big of a hole. So the appointment to Bulin confirms this decline. As for his eyes, that option of economic policy that he proposes is import substitution. I can give arguments why import substitution can provide economic growth. It's very simple. Like, we have 400 billion imports. We can easily replace 200 billion additional income per year. That means 2 trillion investment with a 10% return, and 2 trillion is approximately 70% of the real GDP, So basically what this means is that if we take these 2 trillion today and spread it out over 10 years, we can ensure a 7% economic growth per year. Not an issue. I do not understand why Putin made the decision to abandon this particular strategy. But it's evident that neither the government, nor the central bank, nor the president's admin, the current liberal one, accepts any import substitution. Due to the disintegration of the world into currency zones, the IMF, World Bank, WTO, and all other institutions will come to an end. And these are the exact individuals who, in reality, place the leaders of these extremely progressive politicians of ours in positions of authority. So here is the matter at hand.
Hey everyone, let's raise our hands if you want to ask any questions today. Let's have an assistant help me in the front row area of the room.
Thanks. 2 questions. First of all, you guys, so to speak, mentioned 200 billion import substitution. Well, in my opinion, like not experts, it means dropping the Iron Curtain, because in everything else we're losing competitively. We're a northern country, and everything here is more expensive, like than in other countries.
Well, let's keep it simple, shall we?
So diapers.
What are you trying to say, that we can't produce solid?
They will be more expensive because for 9 months a year, this workshop needs to be heated, which they produce. It's just questions, that's all.
There is a whole bunch of different nuances here, because we have a currency policy, we have a credit policy, we have a tax policy. Here's an example I'm giving. The climate in the USA and Europe in general is similar. The USA is currently dragging the European Union into the zone of free trade, which is happening today. Why? Because as demand decreases, it becomes clear and obvious that the capacities are not being utilized to their full potential. And obviously, Americans would rather prefer European powers to be burdened, not American ones. And since taxes in Europe are stronger and higher than in the USA, then in case of complete free competition, Europe, as a producer, will go bankrupt. We're going to require certain protective measures, but they will not be excessively extravagant.
Yes, here I am. A more global question. This is your entire initial and subsequent premise that technological zones develop, and when there is nowhere else to develop, then crises and various cataclysms arise, and the world is reshaped and transformed in profound ways that shape the course of history. Where does the knowledge come from that, for example, in the technological zone there is nowhere to develop now? Africa is brimming with it. There is a large number of individuals in areas that are not covered in any way.
Why was the Russian Empire at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century part of the German technological zone and couldn't make its own? For a simple reason, because we require not only physical individuals, but also individuals who consume products or services. At the start of the century, 80% of the Russian Empire's population, though 80 million people needed for tech zone, lived rurally, totaling 130 million, yet not consumers. There were 2 attempts to transform them into consumers. Well, during that time, the primary product was machinery, so they must have been utilizing machinery products. The initial one was carried out by Stolypin. Stolypin made the decision to replicate the policy of land consolidation of the 16th, the 17th century in England. So like, he kind of decided that these fists, they're going to take land away from their neighbors, and some of them will work for him as serfs, while others will go to the city as laborers. Purely fencing, even when it comes to politics, you know. Hang those who are, you know, vagabonds. How Henry VIII hanged them, and there's Elizabeth the English. No dice. As a result, the level of social tension in the village reached such a magnitude that both Stolypin and the Russian Empire ceased to exist. Stalin maintained the identical policy of converting the natural economy into a consumer of machine-building products. He did it simply. He built a superstructure on the peasant as a collective farm. The farm became a consumer of engineering products. And that's when he initiated an industrial revolution and established an independent technological zone. Africa, India, and even part of China, they are not consumers. And you are unable to make them consumers rapidly. There is absolutely no way, Jose. It has been multiple decades. That is the end of it, period. I had an absolutely incredible story. It happened exactly 1 year ago at the prestigious Astana Economic Forum, where I had an engaging discussion with Domingo Cavalli, the talented and influential hotshot from Argentina, who was making waves in the economic world. Argentina is still a Latin American country where the sense of justice is stronger than the sense of justice in our country, so they condemned their Gaidar, unlike the way we did. That's the reason why he resides in America, travels to other countries, and in Argentina he is unable to be subjected to judgment. So accordingly, there was a section on the forum where I was a moderator, and Domingo Cavalli was there foaming at the mouth, explaining the drop in demand when not all Chinese people have an iPhone yet. And he's talking, and there's a Chinese guy sitting to my right. I'm telling you, now tell me what you have to say about it. A Chinese person says, you know, he says, this year, at the beginning of 2012, this year we raised the level of poverty in our country, the subsistence minimum, from $1 of income per day to $1.50 of income per day. And we have a total of over 100 million people like that. These individuals are unable to afford the expensive price of buying an iPhone. Then he took a lengthy pause and said, well, they can be given credit. He took another lengthy pause and said, but they will not believe him. Domingo Cavalli was obviously experiencing a streak of success, but he continued to persevere. And here to my left was seated the State Minister of Finance of Canada, who was not supposed to speak according to the plan, but I appreciated the way he smiled at certain moments. That's why I say, we have someone who knows what a budget is. Let's ask him, shall we? The Finance Minister of Canada, the State Minister, heads the ministry's apparatus, unaffected by government changes. So, he delivered an absolutely incredible speech, and I will provide an exact quotation of it at this very moment. He stated it in this manner. When I was young, my parents frequently did not purchase items I desired because they stated we needed to live within our financial limitations. Currently, in the past few decades, people have clearly started purchasing way more items than they can afford financially. I have reason to believe that, we are going to have to return to those principles that were passed down to us by our parents. That is the end, period. Domingo Cavalli got himself all spotty and did not show his face anymore, disappearing completely from sight. This is about, oh, by the way, for all you folks out there, yeah, I'm going to drop a little nugget of wisdom here. There was this American writer named Leslie Waller who, back in the early 1960s, wrote a book with a poetic title called The Banker. And yeah, unfortunately, he is no longer with us. May he rest in peace. I highly recommend everyone to read this book. It's available online for free. The awesomeness of this book is that in 1961, the main character, a banker, gives speeches about how the consumer credit boom won't lead to anything good. There's still a lot of things there. This is a good book in terms of art. She made a strong impression on me when I read it at around 15. There are a lot of very interesting and subtle moments there, but since they are no longer relevant, I won't talk about it right now.
Thank you so much. Vasiliev Badr Khan, Institute of Oriental Studies of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Thanks a bunch for a really interesting lecture. I have an inquiry that I recently posed in this very same audience to Mr. Yevgeny Yasin, seeking his expertise and insights on the matter at hand. Does global capitalism lead the world into a state of regression at this current moment in time or not? This is the initial question. I observe that the condition of regression is presently being expressed in the global forefront that is happening in Syria. How is this front going to end? And could you please share 2 comments, if you don't mind, about what is happening in Cyprus in connection with Russian capital? I would be interested to hear your perspective on this matter. And on the day preceding yesterday, a proposal was put forward to establish the BRICS Bank as well as the Stabilization Fund. Here, if you don't mind, I'd like feedback.
In my opinion, this is a stillborn project. It was initially developed by Goldman Sachs around 5 to 7 years ago with the purpose of selling new bonds in the market. This project is stillborn because it includes countries that are part of 3 different currency zones. Even in 4 potential currency zones in total, they have nothing in common. That's why all these ideas of integrating such financial institutions are pointless. Is it logical to have the customs union in conjunction with Turkey, considering the benefits and drawbacks of such a partnership for both parties involved? So there is, and Israel will also join the customs union. And where else can he go? He's got nowhere else to go. And now I repeat, you just need to understand that the customs union is not what it is now, but rather something completely different. But, like theoretically, how the current customs union can be brought to this point. When it comes to Syria, it's a war between those same groups I mentioned, the 3 of them. I was making alterations in groups with the groupings of American national interests and international bankers, which is further complicated by the fact that there are mechanisms set in motion even before the crisis by the same Americans. I'm inclined to think that Assad will hold out, but you can think for yourself, yeah? Given the pressure that is being exerted on the Syrian government, it can only hold on with 100% support from the population. Here's Assad. Maybe 30 to 40% of the population didn't like him when he was around before all this started. I was in Syria about 5 years ago, and let me tell you, it was an absolutely amazing country. I was completely shocked there. It's evening, already night. We're walking along Damascus. And there, there are these little steps and a door to a shop. And in front of the clothing store door, there's a very little girl standing there. She's 2 years old, all alone. We walk into the store, and there we see that mom is doing something, not paying attention. The girl is standing. I'm asking our guide, what is it that they're not afraid of? Are you out of your mind or what? In Syria, it is not possible for someone to cause harm to a child. There is absolutely no way, Jose. Here you go. Well, overall, it was a pretty amazing country. Here you go. And of course, I really don't like what they're doing to her there, clearly. So here is the arrangement. In Libya, they are providing training to bandits in the camps, as is evident. They send them across the border from Turkey into Syria, and once there, they kill all of them within a span of 1 month. Well, they also terminate many individuals. In a month, there will be something new. So basically, this is pure external aggression. Certainly. When it comes to Turkey, you must understand that Turkey undertook this operation because it was a condition imposed by the Americans to acknowledge the legitimacy of Erdogan's elections. Yes, he had no other choice but to comply with their demand. If not, he would have made himself comfortable there. If not, he would have initiated a civil war. He had no way out then. So everything is really complicated. I don't want to delve into geopolitics now because you can discuss each of these stories for hours. To explain where everyone's ears stick out, who's sticking their nose where, and so on. But here's what I can say. It seems to me that in the near future, Turkey will show interest in the customs union.
Oh, I still vowed to discuss Cyprus, yeah.
And what about Cyprus? Is it a training session on kittens? Well, I will say it again. The banking system, yeah, assets and liabilities. There are no assets. Yes, there are subprime mortgages, derivatives, and some other stuff, along with various other things. And real passive income, people need to give money deposits. But they practiced on kittens what to do if I say, who should I forgive everyone? They were faced with an awkward situation. They were not anticipating that the Parliament of Cyprus would cast a vote against it. I think the idea was to do it quickly, and then spend a few months dealing with lawsuits and like determine how to operate their mechanisms. And instead, chaos ensued, and for the previous 2 weeks, every single media outlet won't stop talking about it. I don't know how much of our money is there. In my opinion, I'm not particularly interested in that. Additionally, there exist varying viewpoints regarding the number of months that have passed since it happened and the current count of months.
If the Russian central bank does implement Basel III on October 1st, but with a slightly narrower scope, how will this affect the banking system and the economy?
So, how's it going, bro? Money's tight, there's no influx, nowhere to invest. So what is it that you want? I am not sure if a Russian bank has the capability to currently implement Basel III. Well, either the question will be resolved as usual. So there's this inspection, right? They come in, find some errors, and then the right person steps in. They start negotiating a bit, and eventually they get a briefcase and write down that everything is fine. So, how's this done? After a while, it turns out the bank went bankrupt, and everyone asks, where was the central bank?
Mikhail Ivanovich, thank you for being here.
Good organization. So, if I understand correctly, if Glaziev had won, in other words, the Rothschild group would have won. Can I finish the question, please? And what does it matter to us ordinary folks? I thought you would tell me about the revival of the Red Project, that as society stratifies, it will remain that way. Why do we care?
So, the word Rothschilds, it is a highly conditional word, as they say in the present day. You have to do it in this manner, correct? Got to represent those quotes. And as for this conspiracy word, I'm a staunch opponent of conspiracy theories, but there are external forces that are interested in us having our own currency zone. Simultaneously, regardless of whether we construct capitalism or communism, we are completely indifferent to the highest degree. And in this particular case, they most likely support Glaziev. I remind you, who was the first to mention Glaziev's last name as a candidate? Who? Reuters, right, Reuters. And Reuters is indeed a structure that is owned and controlled by the Rothschild family. They stated their opinion. Now this is the individual we are supporting. Not because they adore Glaziev, not because Glaziev there is a former member of the CPRF or, respectively, a former minister in the Gaidar government. He truly experienced the entire range, didn't he? However, for an entirely different rationale. Because Glaziev proposed it, he is presently the ideologist of this integration plan that these factions require. That is all. It is nothing personal, just business. Here is my viewpoint on how I perceive this particular situation. Will we be kind of setting up a barracks communism here, or kind of socialism with a human face, or kind of capitalism decent with a human face, or wild capitalism like now? They can start completely from scratch. The key is to have a currency zone.
I am grateful for the lecture, Mikhail Vladimirovich. I had an additional question that I wanted to ask you. Return to the first question. So, colleagues, about replacing external demand with internal demand. That point you're making right now. In one of Oleg Grigoriev's lectures, which were linked on your blog, there is this interesting proof with diagrams when several systems with different levels of division of labor start to interact. An efficient product is found. Well, in our case, it is clear which one, and all other productions die out. And in this case, now I wanted to wrap up this question. So it turns out that we can only go back to the Iron Curtain, as our comrade said, to Valenki and galoshes.
I do not truly understand the concept of the Iron Curtain because, it is like the late 19th century with 3 different currency zones that existed during that time period. The zone of the German mark, the zone of the British pound, and the zone of the dollar. There was no Iron Curtain between them. It's just that these were independent systems of division of labor, in each of which it was more advantageous to exchange inside than therefore with the opposite. Let me give you an example. There's this republic in our country called Czechoslovakia, and is there a new president, Or did the head of Chuvashia come up with the idea to emulate Comrade Lukashenko and exert pressure on officials to sell Chuvashia's high-tech products in different geographical locations? And here's one bureaucrat who managed to sell this very high-tech Chuvash product all the way to Uzbekistan. And everything would have been fine, but ultimately he sold it for money. The catfish are there in Uzbekistan. They can be found in that country. And now he is thinking, what should he do with these catfish in the Uzbek bank? We're telling him, well, like what? Do you have a textile factory? Well, buy some cotton there and process it. He says, we had the biggest textile factory in the USSR, but now it's gone. There's nothing at all, empty space. I'm like, what's the problem? Well, here's your chance. Since you have the funds, you can buy cotton and request money from the government to build a new textile factory. Similar to restoring an old one. Well, it is a quite tough question, you know. This is not an iron curtain, it is those technological zones. When you're trapped in chains and the risks of escaping the chain are too high, that's it. And a protection system. Yes, sure, there are some customs barriers or non-customs barriers over there. But how does the European Union protect its own products now? He's coming up with some idiotic rules. Well, for instance, yeah, I was simply observing, you know, like Euronews. When I have breakfast in the morning, I consume tea and watch Euronews. And thus you can see European farmers are complaining that they are forced to play music for the chickens to keep them entertained in the chicken coops and to let the pigs out into the common yard so they don't get bored from the heat. They say that because they have to drive them back, the cost of pork increases. Yes, however, the European Union, due to the fact that pigs in other countries have violated their standards, consequently experience negative feelings, resulting in their decision not to purchase this pork, but to buy their own, which is more costly. Well, here you go, the mechanism of non-tariff protection. So what's stopping us, huh? So, like, you know, because those chickens do not comprehend Russian, they are in a negative mood. And that is the reason why we are unable to consume them. So what's the problem? Well, go ahead. It is going to be more costly. No, because in reality, everyone will purchase chicken, but a slightly smaller number of individuals will purchase a brand new iPhone. Does that bother you? I do not give a damn about it. What is the difference? Who needs these iPhones after all? So you will not purchase yourself a fifth instead of the fourth. What a disappointment.
Nikolai Ivanovich, these areas, let's say, were established rapidly, progressed, and ultimately reached a point where further growth was no longer feasible. Are we going to wait for a war?
So yeah, theoretically, if everything keeps repeating like before, then in 20, 30 years, these import zones will be replaced, adapted, and fully exhausted their potential. And after that, only war will remain. With one single exception. Firstly, there is already a theory that demonstrates that this path of development is not favorable. During the early 20th century, this theory did not even exist because Rosa Luxemburg was killed and nobody else carried it forward or promoted its ideas. Secondly, I still don't rule out the possibility that we'll think and come up with some new way of development apart from scientific and technological progress. Ultimately, we encountered alterations in our development models, as you are well aware of the fact. There was an ancient model which then transitioned to feudalism, and feudalism later transformed into capitalism. Perhaps, you know, like based on scientific and technological progress because it was the same under capitalism and socialism. Maybe it'll go on. For example, I have an opinion that the next model will be a model of social progress, not scientific and technical progress. Well, that's just my 2 cents. And then, by the way, the idea of the RED project as a tool for stimulating these social mechanisms arises. Because theoretically, I believe that in the USSR, the mechanisms of public projects, especially in the early stages in the 30s and 40s, were much more developed than in the West. Out West, we understand that everything is crystal clear. If they say juvenile justice, then it's juvenile justice. If they say homosexual marriages, then it signifies homosexual marriages. There is a totalitarian society there. You cannot deviate from the party line. And any attempt to step away is a huge scandal. Did you hear about Hungary? They just added a mind-blowing thesis to their constitution stating that marriage is a union between a man and a woman. They ripped her apart in Brussels. However hungry, they are blackmailing Brussels to provide them with money. However, it is still like, however, that is some heavy bullshit. And at the present moment, they are stating that we will not allow homosexual couples to adopt children. So in the West, another shitstorm is brewing again. I'll say it again. The West is a totalitarian society that is actually leading itself into a pit within the framework of this liberal line. And our luck is that the crisis happened right now. If it happened in 20 years, I think it would be a total nightmare. It would have all ended in a bloody mess.